Hi, I'm Rabbi Ariana Kaptauber, and I'm here with Dr. Kamika Campbell, my friend here in the Harrisburg community. And we are having a program on Sunday, Friendsgiving, where we're bringing together the young professionals in the Jewish and Black communities here in Harrisburg. And particularly, we felt like this was important to bring these communities together in this moment where there's so much going on in the media about Jews and Blacks and tension between us and what's going on there and stuff in the media, but we didn't feel like it really feels the same on the ground level, like among people who actually know each other.
That's
so we just wanted to talk about what this is like for us.
Absolutely right.
You know, what is tricky about this conversation for us and what is a great opportunity.
Yeah. So I think the tricky part is folks have a lot of conceptualizations around what it means to be white, what it means to be Black, and what it means to be Jewish. And a lot of folks are very much looking at national conversations and trying to translate them down to the ground. And there's a lot of, what's the word for that? Mistranslation, I guess is the best way to put it, because folks don't really understand why certain conversations, why they should look deeper into certain conversations, why they should look deeper into certain stereotypes, why they should look deeper into their own beliefs about Jewish people, about Black people, about different, and you know, if we're widening the conversation, which I don't know if we will or not, but how that relates to how we talk about other cultures and other people and other intra and interracial configurations. So that's a lot of words I said, but
I was picking up what you were laying down. I think what that was making me think about is how one thing that's tricky for Jews is, you know, Jews are identified so many different ways. We're a religion, we're a cultural group, we're also, you know, many intersecting identities, and sometimes we're seen as a racial group from the outside, right? That was, you know, the problem with Jews in Europe and Nazism. So it's really tricky to navigate conversations about anti-Semitism and racism and how they intersect and how they're different. And that can be really hard to figure out what identity am I bringing into this conversation.
But I also think it exemplifies how you cannot stereotype. So when I was talking to someone about like the current issues, they said, "Oh, you thought I was talking about this kind of Jew." And I said, well, you didn't specify, and that's the point. The point is you can't do the broad brush painting on either side. And so like I'm not an all sides person, and that's why this conversation, that's the other tricky part about this for me too. I do not want to have there are good people on all sides conversation at all. But I do want to have a real conversation about how we don't know sometimes how we're supporting the very harmful and divisive hegemony of white supremacy and how that plays out in very dangerous ways in the community, right? In our community, in so the respective communities, but also the joint community, right? Because you don't want to ever say, oh, everybody's in one community, because that's also not true. We operate in our communities, in our cultural enclaves, and that's great, that's beautiful, but we also come together as a larger community. And how does that look when we are experiencing this kind of like barrage and deluge of information that's, you know, constantly trying to pit people against each other? How do you navigate that?
Right. And I love what you're saying about not painting with a broad brush, right? Like hashtag not all Jews, right? Like, let's not, right? We're not all the same. There's so many different intersecting identities. There's just, you know, they say actually there's a joke that's like you get 2 Jews and you get 3 opinions, right? Like, you can't, we're really not the same. And these conversations of like the Jewish and the Black community are at odds, like that's totally, you know, oversimplifying.
It's very much not as cut and dry as people make it. And when you start, it's funny when you start kind of like deconstructing that idea with folks, when you start to like literally take the building blocks of it and break it down and go, so are you talking about, oh no, those are the poor Jews, I don't mean them. And you're talking about, oh well, those are the other, I don't mean them. Well, those are the browner Jews, I don't mean them. So what do you mean? Right. And let's talk about that. And what people usually mean is this kind of stereotypical idea of a rich white male Jew, which is very close for them to a rich white male guy in society.
Right.
And you know, there's a really great scholar who wrote a book on how the Jews became white folks, and it is actually the Jewish literacy or the Jewish, it's a like a literary suggesting organization, and they had suggested the book, and this was years ago. It was like 20 years ago. And the person wrote the book in the 90s. And I read it while I was in Brooklyn because a Jewish woman suggested it to me, and I was like, how do you even know about this? And I can't remember all of what you know kind of was laid out now, but what stuck with me was the idea that when marginalized communities come into the United States, in particular, a lot of folks try to advance towards what they think is the most successful thing in the community, in the society, and what that looks like in the United States is a rich white guy. And we whether we admit to it or not, I think we all have had, because it's built into the fabric of everything. We all were or are trying to be successful, and what successful looks like is baked into what successful looks like. And so if we're willing to acknowledge that, but then we understand how different people with different characteristics can subscribe to whiteness in this country in an effort to be successful and to have things for their families and to do these things, and it's not different in any other community. Now, who can access that is absolutely different, and that's a discussion. Some people feel very strongly that, you know, folks access those aspects of whiteness, and that they are then now fully assimilated into that. But when you scratch the surface, when you dig a little deeper, it's just not true.
That's totally it. And yes, I mean, when I studied a little bit about this in college, and I, you know, learned about the GI Bill, which was given, you know, cheap loans for housing to white veterans and not to black veterans, and I'm not even sure for other folks, but I know my own grandparents benefited from that and got their housing through that, and I totally understood, like, wow, this is part of Jews becoming white, especially in that time period. And at the same time, like you were saying, when you scratch the surface, I think there's a real fear, and especially right now, and that's part of this this tension right now, is that Jews are feeling like we're always still other, and even white Jews, like, we could be kicked out of whiteness at any time, and we have been kicked out of whiteness, out of, you know, the people in power group.
It's scary for people
in countries around the world, and so it does bring up that, like, generational trauma, and so
because what does it mean to be kicked out of whiteness, right? It means you lose access to resources. That's what
it does. Yeah, I mean, it's very concrete, like we were saying with the money for the GI Bill, and so I think there's a lot of fear right now for Jews, and even if because of these narratives of anti-Semitism, which are not only coming from the black community, in fact, primarily they're coming from, you know, sort of far fringe on both sides of the political spectrum, from folks of all races, but especially from white supremacist movements. And so it's a time of heightened fear where it's like, oh, Jews are not blending in. White Jews are not blending in the same way. And could we lose our whiteness? And there's a lot of fear around that, I think, and danger. And I think, you know, communities of color are feeling similarly threatened in this environment. Absolutely. And so that fear actually drives us apart when, in fact, we could unite to...
Yes, and it's this idea that, we've wanted to speak out about how we feel like we're treated by the Jewish community, but we can't, because we're going to be accused of anti-Semitism. That's really the bottom line of it.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, we've seen the stories, we've seen all of these kind of like big splashy headlines on it. Why would people connect? Why would a black person in Harrisburg connect to that? Why would a black person in Harrisburg be like, yeah, I identify with why this person would feel that way? What's the reason?
Right.
And the reason is there's this kind of very normal idea that Jewish people are going to have more access to resources than you because they're able to assimilate into whiteness, and you are not.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
You know, and like, what does that look like, and how does that play out? And we talked about some of those stereotypes, and we'll talk more about them on Sunday. But there's a real fear that, you know, people, it's that pie notion. Like, everyone wants everyone thinks power is like pie.
It's a finite amount of resources, like we gotta get them. Yeah.
And if you're getting some, I can't get some. Instead
Right.
of understanding that power is regenerative, and it is not it not only is it not finite, but It is regenerative in a way that if you cut yourself off from other communities, you are going to cut yourself off from the resource that you think you are getting if you cut yourself off from other communities. It's just a weird kind of issue. Like when you divide yourself from especially other marginalized groups in this way because you see their access to whiteness as something that is a threat to you, we further complicate what it means to do life and be in community with people and have access to resources. So it's just this weird, and I am a very like pro-black, pro-justice, everything, that vein of everything community person, and it's hard for me to even grapple with, discussing these things because other blacks are like, well, you're just taking up for the Jews, you're just taking up for white people, you're just taking up, and I'm like, no, I just understand that, listen, we have to find points of solidarity against white supremacy, even with white people. We gotta do it there too, because white supremacy hurts everybody, except for like a very small amount of people. Yeah. And we have to understand that. We have to find a way to get.
Well, and I think what you were saying before also about like what's the local interest, like what's the human interest in this, right? There's so much that when it's in these national headlines, it's inclined towards painting with a broad brush and without nuance, and it becomes really hard then when you're having these national conversations on Twitter or whatever with people all over the country, all over the world, it becomes hard to bring it down to that human level and to hold nuance that way. And I think that's why, we could talk about having a piece of pie while we eat pie at Friendsgiving. Hopefully we better get some good pies then. So I'm really looking forward to continuing this conversation. I learned so much from you and I'm excited to continue and I feel really heard. Yeah, and I think it's too rare in these days, and I'm glad to have a partner. Yeah. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. Happy holidays.
Yeah.